The new intern accidentally ripped the millionaire's pants, and what he did next surprised everyone. Before we start the story, leave a comment telling us which city you're watching from. And at the end, don't forget to rate the story from 0 to 10. Enjoy the story. Julia was holding her coffee cup like it was a trophy after a marathon. She took a deep breath, looked around, and thought to herself, "All right, coffee secured. Now I just need to get out without causing an accident." She took 2 steps, and on the third, Destiny decided to play a trick. Her heel caught on the raised corner of the carpet like a ninja trap. The world spun, the cup shook, her heart raced. In a desperate reflex, she reached out for something, anything to grab onto. Unfortunately, she found a man's pants. The sound of the button popping off was loud and clear, and in less than a second, the pants dropped straight to the man's ankles. When she looked, she saw her fingers tightly holding the waistband of a pair of dress pants. She blinked. Yes, black underwear, loose belt, bare legs, and right in front of her, standing like a museum statue, was him. Dylan Carter, CEO, partner, elegant, powerful, and now, without pants. "What are you doing, you crazy woman?" Dylan shouted, jumping back while trying to cover himself with his hands. The room froze. One employee dropped the cookie she had in her mouth. An intern crossed himself. Another whispered a muffled, "Oh no." Julia froze, her hand still on his waistband, her eyes wide open, her coffee shaking in her other hand. I tripped." Her voice came out so high it sounded like a whistle. "It was the carpet, I swear. I didn't mean to. I didn't even know it was pants." "And what did you think it was?" "A curtain," Dylan yelled, holding the waistband and trying to pull the pants back up, his face red, somewhere between outraged and completely baffled. She tried to let go but lost her balance even more and almost fell right on top of him. "Oh my gosh, oh no. Let go. For the love of God, let go." Dylan was backing away, half-hopping, with the pants still at his ankles. Who holds on to a pair of pants with that kind of determination? Dylan exclaimed, trying to rescue both his dignity and his pants at the same time. She let go of the pants like they were burning hot. "Oh my gosh, I swear I didn't mean to. I'm not crazy. I'm just clumsy. Really clumsy," she said, blushing from her forehead down to her neck. Yeah, I noticed, dear. I'm standing here in my underwear in the middle of the office," he answered, bending down to pull his pants up at Olympic speed. Julia tried to hide behind her coffee cup, but there was nowhere to hide. By now, everyone was watching. One of the team lawyers whispered, "This definitely violates some kind of dress code or sanity clause." The head of HR passed by the door, saw the scene, and with a tired sigh muttered, "I'm going to pretend this is a collective hallucination." Dylan finally zipped up, tightened his belt, and with that dangerous, sarcastic smile, walked over to Julia. "Let me get this straight. You walk in here, pull my pants down in front of 20 people, and think you're just going to walk out with a sorry and a cup of coffee?" She stammered, almost tripping over her own words. "I'm Julia, Dr. Michael's intern, and I just wanted a coffee." "And ended up with a scandal," he replied, almost laughing. "Fantastic. You're like an earthquake with an ID badge." The whole room was holding back laughter, but one of the analysts couldn't help it and burst out with a nervous laugh, trying to cover it up with a sip of coffee that almost made him choke. I can clean the carpet, or buy you new pants. I have $18 in my account," Julia said in total panic. "Oh, great. So if I have a gala event this week, I'll just buy a pair of used jeans from the flea market." "Problem solved," Dylan said, laughing. She took a step back, tripped on the same corner of the carpet, and almost fell again, but this time managed to hold on to what was left of her dignity. Barely. Dylan crossed his arms and finished. "Welcome to the office, Julia. You managed in 2 minutes what no one else could do in 2 years. Leave everyone speechless and almost breathless from laughing so hard." She shook her head, totally lost. "I'm going to quit. That's the best thing. I saw your underwear. I can't live with that," she blurted, covering her face. "Relax. The underwear survived. My reputation not so much, but you'll get used to it," he said, now laughing for real. And at that moment, Julia was sure of 2 things. She had no idea how she was still alive. This was officially the worst first day in internship history. Or maybe the best start to something completely unexpected. If Julia thought the coffee room disaster would stay in the past, she was deeply mistaken. The next morning, she tried her best to go unnoticed. She walked like she was part of the furniture, avoiding everyone, staring at the floor, holding a folder as if it were a shield against the universe. But the universe had a name and a last name, and it was coming. Well, well, look who's here. The Pants Destroyer. Dylan's unmistakable voice echoed down the hallway, just as she thought she might make it through reception unnoticed. Julia squinted, pretending she hadn't heard. She picked up her pace. Hey, hold on there, Intern. He caught up to her with that smile, half teasing, half charming, that only he could pull off. Are you running away from me? She took a deep breath, clutched her badge tightly, and turned around, trying to keep her dignity intact. Me? Run away? Of course not, I'm just focused, she replied, adjusting her blazer even though it wasn't out of place. Dylan crossed his arms, tilted his head slightly, and looked at her like she was a tricky puzzle to solve. Focused, huh? Then be careful not to focus so much that you end up ripping someone's jacket today. Very funny. She rolled her eyes, biting her tongue not to say more. Don't worry, your pants are safe. For today. Dylan tapped his chin, pretending to think. Maybe I should get suspenders, just to be safe. The sound of hurried footsteps interrupted their exchange. Michael appeared carrying a stack of folders. He noticed the scene and couldn't resist. Here he comes, Michael said, looking from Julia to Dylan. Careful, Julia. Word is, when his pants fell, his ego went down with them. Julia couldn't hold back her laughter. Dylan raised an eyebrow, pretending to be offended. Very funny, Michael, very. Then he turned to Julia. See, I'm the victim here. She smiled as she adjusted the papers in her hands. If you want, I can start a fundraiser to buy you a stronger belt. And I can set up warning cones around the office to protect you from those killer rugs. Dylan shot back, crossing his arms, looking her up and down, clearly enjoying himself. Michael shook his head, trying not to laugh. My goodness, you two are like a walking sitcom. Wrong, Dylan replied. I'm the victim in this sitcom. She's the bringer of chaos. Julia gave him an ironic smile. Chaos? Me or no? I'm pure peace and quiet. Peace? He let out a short laugh. You've got the subtlety of a hurricane, Intern. She put her hands on her hips, staring him down. And you've got an ego the size of this building. I'd say we're pretty even. For a few seconds, the two stood in silence, staring at each other like this verbal sparring was some kind of sport. Whoever blinked first would lose. Michael walked between them, giving them both a light pat on the shoulder. All right. Let's get to work before the boss shows up in tears. He paused, realizing his choice of words, and added, well, probably best not to use the word tear right now. Dylan shook his head, amused, and walked down the hall. But of course, not without one last remark. Careful, Julia, I'm watching you. From now on, rugs, chairs, ties, everything's a risk. She crossed her arms and shot back without even thinking. Perfect. And I'm watching too. Especially the seams on your pants. His smile widened, and for a moment, it felt like this wasn't just playful teasing anymore. There was something more there. Julia took a deep breath, shook her head, and turned to follow Michael. They stepped into the office, and only once the door closed behind them did she let out, Seriously, Michael. Is this normal? Is he always like this? Michael dropped the folders on the table, pulled out his chair, and sat down. With everyone? No. Only when someone does something truly unforgettable, like pulling his pants off in front of 20 people. She covered her face, embarrassed. I'm going to be remembered for that forever, aren't I? Oh, without a doubt, he said, laughing. But you know what? I think he deserved it. Dylan's the kind of guy who thinks the world revolves around him. And you. Michael looked at her, smiling. You were like a storm he never saw coming. Julia took a deep breath, organized the papers on the table, and smiled. Well then, he better get ready, because this storm has a name, and it's Julia. On the other side of the wall, Dylan adjusted his tie, looking out the window of his office, wearing a different kind of smile. Julia, he repeated quietly, almost without realizing it. That intern. And at that moment, even if he'd never admit it, it was already clear that she was anything but someone easy to ignore. The next few days followed a curious pattern. Every time Julia thought she'd get a moment of peace, Dylan would show up with a new joke, a sarcastic comment, or simply that half smile she was already starting to recognize as his teasing smile. But that morning, the atmosphere at the office was different. The sound of hurried heels, urgent phone calls, and hushed conversations filled the air with tension. Even the usual smell of coffee seemed less welcoming. Julia straightened the papers on Michael's desk, noticing his expression was more serious than usual. "Did something happen?" she asked, frowning. Michael took a deep breath and ran a hand through his hair. "Oh, something definitely happened. The office is on fire." Not literally, but almost. Before she could ask what he meant, the conference room door flew open. And who walked in? Of course, Dylan, wearing a flawless suit, face tight and clearly not happy. "This is ridiculous," he snapped, pacing back and forth. Years handling this client, and now, this! Right behind him came the firm's managing partner, the feared Mr. Benson. A man of few words, but when he spoke, the whole building listened. "Dylan," his voice was steady. "The client was clear. He doesn't want you on the case anymore." Dylan turned stunned. "That makes no sense. I know that contract backwards and forwards." Mr. Benson crossed his arms. "Exactly. And even so, you missed a detail that cost us his trust." Julia and Michael exchanged a glance. She whispered, "This sounds serious." Michael replied in the same tone, "That's because it is." The partner continued, straight to the point. "The client wants a new attorney, and from now on, the person handling the case." He paused, looking straight at Michael. "Is you, Michael." Dylan stood frozen. "What? You heard me. The case is yours now, and of course, put your own team together." Michael took a deep breath, managing his surprise. "Understood, sir. I'll take care of it." The partner nodded and left the room, leaving behind a heavy silence. Dylan needed a moment to process. When he finally turned around, he saw, Julia, standing there with a look of surprise and discomfort, holding a folder like a shield. "No," he said, shaking his head and rubbing his chin. "This isn't happening." Michael, half smiling, patted Julia on the back. "Oh, it's happening. You're officially on the team now, Julia." Her eyes widened. "Me? Really?" "Really," he confirmed. "I need someone organized, focused, and not afraid to handle tough situations." Dylan crossed his arms, eyeing the two of them. "Oh, sure, because nothing says legal excellence like hiring the woman who once pulled someone's pants down by accident." Julia took a breath, adjusted her blazer, and replied without missing a beat. "Don't worry. In this case, the only thing I plan to bring down are arguments." Michael held back a laugh. "That was a good one." Dylan ran a hand over his face, clearly frustrated. "This is insane. I've been working on this case for months. I know every clause, every detail, and now you think you can just walk in, sit down, and fix everything?" Michael, staying calm, answered, Actually, that's exactly what we're going to do." Julia tried not to smile, but it was impossible. Seeing Dylan, usually so confident, lose his composure like that was almost therapeutic. "Oh, and just so you know," Michael added, "the client doesn't want your name connected to the case anymore. So Dylan, better stay out of it." Dylan took a sharp breath, jaw tight. "Great, perfect, wonderful." He turned to Julia. "But just so you know, intern, this," he pointed to her, then to Michael, then back again. "This won't end well." She crossed her arms, steady gaze locked on his. "Look, for me, it's already off to a great start." Dylan blinked, surprised. For a moment he had no comeback. A rare thing, very rare. "Well, if you'll excuse me." He straightened his tie, pretending to be in control. "I have more productive things to do than watch this circus burn." He walked out confidently, but at the door, he paused, looked back, and added, "Just try not to trip over your own ego, intern." Julia smiled calmly. "Don't worry. And you, be careful with your buttons." Michael, already seated at his desk, shook his head. Oh boy, this is going to be a lot of fun. And little did they know, that case wouldn't just change the direction of the firm. It was going to change absolutely everything in their lives. The office was still buzzing. Papers printing, lawyers rushing down hallways with thick folders, phones ringing nonstop. Julia, sitting in Michael's office, slowly spun in her chair, eyeing the growing pile of folders beside the desk, like a small mountain. "Okay, where do I start?" she asked, tucking her hair behind her ear. Michael let out a sigh, adjusting in his chair. "This case is a real ticking time bomb, Julia. And guess what? Now it's in our hands." She grabbed a random folder, opened it, and started reading, frowning after just a few pages. "Wow, there's so much here. This is the acquisition process for a hotel chain, he explained, pointing to some contracts spread out on the table. It's a huge deal, and even the smallest mistake could cost millions. Julia bit her lower lip, studying the documents. Her eyes scanned through the clauses, trying to absorb every detail. Michael watched her with a half smile. Relax, take your time. You don't have to understand everything at once. But Julia didn't answer. Her furrowed brow showed she was completely focused on those papers. Minutes passed, then hours. She read, scribbled notes, pulled other documents, made quick annotations, checked dates, signatures, terms, until suddenly something caught her attention. Wait a second, she murmured, pulling out an older sheet. She read it again, went back to another document, compared clauses, grabbed a highlighter, circled one item, then underlined another. Michael noticed the sudden silence. Is everything okay over there? Maybe yes, or maybe no, she answered, chewing on the pen cap. Tell me something. This contract here. She lifted the paper. It's tied to the franchise agreement, right? That's right, Michael confirmed. Why? She quickly flipped through another document, pointing to a specific clause. So, if it's tied, this doesn't make sense. Take a look. Michael stood up, walked over to her, picked up the paper, and as he read, his eyebrows slowly started to rise. No, that can't be, he said, pulling out another folder and flipping through it. This. Julia grabbed another sheet, almost tripping over her own words. Here, look at this clause. It completely contradicts what's in the master agreement. If this goes to court, the client loses. Michael stayed silent for a few seconds. Then he set the papers down, ran a hand through his hair, and took a deep breath. Julia, this is a massive mistake. She raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms. Like Grand Canyon size? More like black hole size, he answered, still in disbelief. If the client found out, our reputation would be done for. And if the other party found out, she added, it would be a disaster. Michael pulled out a chair, sat down, and started typing on his laptop. We need to rework this immediately. And, he looked at her smiling, you, young lady, just saved the case. Julia smiled, still not quite believing it. Really? Really, he confirmed, nodding. And you know what the most unbelievable part of all this is? That you're going to promote me and double my salary? She answered, barely holding back a laugh. No. He laughed. That Dylan didn't catch this. His name lingered in the air for a few seconds. Michael shook his head, still surprised. How did he miss something so basic? Maybe because he was too busy fixing his pants instead of reading contracts, Julia joked with a shrug. Michael tried to hold back a laugh. Could be. Hours later, the meeting room was full. The client, an elegant gentleman in a perfectly tailored gray suit, sat at the table with a serious expression, surrounded by assistants and directors. Dylan was there too, leaning against the wall, arms crossed, tense expression. Clearly not happy. Senior partner Benson took his seat at the head of the table. Well, gentlemen, we're here to discuss the case updates, he said, looking at Michael. Go ahead. Michael stood up, took a deep breath, and began. After a thorough review of the contracts, we found an inconsistency that could have led to a significant loss. The client immediately widened his eyes. Inconsistency? What do you mean? Michael nodded, keeping calm. Julia, please. Everyone turned to look at her. Julia straightened her papers, took a deep breath, and walked over to the projector. Basically, sir, she began, projecting the documents on the screen, there's a clause in the franchise agreement that directly contradicts the acquisition contract. This means, legally, your exclusivity rights could be challenged. The client blinked, surprised. And this was there from the beginning? Yes, she answered, pointing at the documents. And if it hadn't been corrected, it could have allowed your competitors to file a lawsuit questioning the agreement. Absolute silence. Dylan, still with his arms crossed, clenched his jaw, taking a deep breath, his eyes fixed on her. The client leaned forward at the table, looking directly at Michael and Julia. Did you fix this? Michael smiled. Yes, sir. We reworked the contracts, added legal protection clauses, and adjusted the exclusivity terms. He handed a new folder to the client. Here are the updated documents. The client flipped through the documents quickly, analyzing. As he read, his expression shifted, from tense to relieved, then to something close to satisfaction. Impressive, he said, looking at Benson. This is top-notch work. Benson smiled, pleased. We have the best. The client stood up and shook Michael's hand. Congratulations, it's excellent job. Then he turned to Julia. And you? Are you an intern? She nodded, a bit shy. For now. The man laughed. If you keep this up, you're going to pass a lot of people in this office. Dylan, standing in the corner, let out a heavy sigh. He adjusted his tie, clearly torn between frustration and something he wasn't used to feeling, admiration. Benson wrapped up the meeting with compliments, promises of future contracts, and that usual feeling of a job well done. As everyone started to leave, Dylan walked over slowly, hands in his pockets, that half-smile on his face. Congratulations, intern, he said, his tone somewhere between sarcastic and sincere. So, do you want my diploma now, or later? Julia crossed her arms, looking him straight in the eye. I'll take it. And if you want, I can also teach you how not to lose a lawsuit. For a couple of seconds, Dylan was speechless. No comeback. Then, he let out a short laugh, shaking his head. You are unbelievable. Michael walked past them, laughing. Dylan, I think you just met your kryptonite. Dylan sighed, tightening his tie, and her name is Julia. As he walked back to his office, Dylan couldn't wipe that smile off his face. And deep down, even if he didn't want to admit it, he knew that intern was about to turn his life upside down. And this was just the beginning. Dylan adjusted his tie, but this time it wasn't for style, it was nerves. He stood in front of the glass wall of his office, arms crossed, staring outside without actually seeing anything. Ever since the meeting, where Julia, the intern he had underestimated, saved a multi-million-dollar contract, something inside him felt different. A confusing mix of bruised pride, admiration, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of fascination. He shook his head, letting out a sigh. This is getting out of hand, he muttered to himself. Then suddenly, his eyes landed on the hallway, and there she was, walking with that determined stride, blazer slightly crooked, carrying a folder that looked bigger than she was. Dylan narrowed his eyes, thoughtful. All right, if I can't beat this girl. He crossed his arms. Then how about hiring her? Without thinking twice, he grabbed his phone and dialed. Hey, reception? See if intern Julia can come to my office. No, it's not a problem. Yet. A few minutes later, there were 3 knocks on the door. Come in, he answered, straightening his hair. Julia opened the door, looking suspicious. You again? She crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. If you're here to complain about my blazer, my shoes, or my existence, save it. I'm busy today. He smiled. Relax, Hurricane. I'm not here to tease you. I'm making you an offer. She blinked, skeptical. An offer? Dylan stood up, walked around the desk, and sat on the edge of it, arms crossed. That's right. Okay, if this is about helping you pick stronger belts, I'm not the right person for that, she replied, barely holding back a smile. No. Dylan took a deep breath. I want you to leave Michael and come work with me. The silence in the room was almost solid. Julia blinked several times as if convinced she'd misheard. I'm sorry. What? You heard me. He flashed that signature half-smile. Work with me, on my team. She held back a laugh, crossing her arms. And why exactly would I do that? Dylan stood up and started pacing, gesturing like he was pitching some brilliant plan. Well, let's see. With me, you'd have access to the best cases, the best opportunities, and, he paused, looking right at her. I'll buy you coffee. Every day. Julia burst out laughing. Coffee every day? Wow, what an irresistible offer. Okay, fine, 2 coffees, he shot back, trying not to laugh, and I'll let you pick the music that plays in the office. She raised an eyebrow, pretending to think it over. Tempting, but no. Dylan made a face of disbelief. What do you mean, no? Simple, she smiled. Michael treats me well, he values me, and so far he hasn't tried to bribe me with coffee. Almost at that exact moment, as if the universe had scripted it, the door opened and, guess who? Michael. Did someone say my name? He asked, holding a coffee mug in his hand. What's going on in here? Dylan crossed his arms, looking straight at him. Just an honest attempt to steal your brilliant intern. Michael pretended to think, took a sip of his coffee, and replied, honest. Let me guess. You offered her coffee, didn't you? 2, Dylan corrected, holding up 2 fingers. And music is included. Michael laughed. Don't fall for it, Julia. Don't trust this guy. He just wants you around to steal your talent, or maybe even your heart. Julia's eyes widened, clearly surprised. What? She looked from Michael to Dylan, completely caught off guard. Wait, What? Dylan choked on his own breath. What? No, he rubbed his face and shook his head. Wow, don't be ridiculous, Michael. Michael just shrugged, clearly amused. I'm just saying what I see. Julia shook her head, placing a hand on her forehead. This is surreal. Dylan took a deep breath, pulled himself together, and looked her straight in the eye. All right, let's make this clear. He pointed at her. I only want to hire you because you're smart, capable, and... He paused, breathing in again. Frustratingly good at what you do. Frustratingly? She raised an eyebrow, smiling. Wow, that was almost a compliment. He crossed his arms and looked away. Maybe. Michael laughed, leaning on the doorframe. Told you. The guy's totally lost. I'm not lost, Dylan shot back, pointing a finger. I'm just strategically evaluating talent. Right, Michael said, still laughing. And your strategy is offering coffee and a personalized playlist? Dylan sighed. Okay. It might sound small, but... He pointed again. What if I told you, Julia, you'd get direct access to top-tier clients, high-level cases, and on top of that, he gave a sly smile, your very own coffee cabinet. She pretended to think, pacing around the room. My own coffee cabinet, she put a finger to her chin, with unlimited pods? Absolutely, he answered with confidence. Michael shook his head, laughing. Look, I could try to compete, but I don't think I've got that kind of persuasion. Julia took a deep breath, trying not to laugh. Look, I'll admit, it's tempting, but for now, I think I'll stick with Michael's team. Dylan stroked his chin, looking at her. You enjoy torturing me, don't you? She crossed her arms, smiling. Just a little. Michael straightened up and opened the door. All right, folks, this little professional war has been fun, but we've got a contract to finish. Julia waved as she walked out. Bye, Dylan. It's been educational. He put his hands in his pockets, shaking his head as he watched her go. Educational. Yeah, I think I'm learning more than I expected. Once she disappeared down the hall, Michael looked over at Dylan, trying not to laugh. Man, let me give you a little advice. Here we go, Dylan sighed. Michael smiled. If you think you're in control of this situation, I hate to break it to you, but you're not even close. Dylan laughed, shaking his head. Yeah, I'm starting to realize that. And for the first time in a long time, Dylan Carter, the firm's most feared, meticulous, and arrogant attorney, realized that maybe, just maybe, he had finally met someone who didn't just challenge his mind, but was starting to challenge his heart. The smell of freshly brewed coffee filled the meeting room, mixed with the faint scent of polished wood furniture, and a good dose of anxiety. Julia adjusted her blazer for the third time, taking a deep breath. Her hands were sweaty, her leg was bouncing under the table, and her mind kept repeating, Breathe, Julia. It's just a meeting. Just a client. Just one of the most demanding clients this firm has ever seen. At the end of the table sat Mr. Villanova, a well-known businessman, owner of an international resort chain, flipping through documents with his usual expression, serious, focused, and impatient. Next to him, two assistants typed furiously. And of course, Dylan was there too, sitting calmly, or pretending to be, adjusting his suit like it was just another normal day. He glanced over at Julia and with his trademark smile whispered, Nervous, intern? She fixed her hair and gripped her pen. Me? Not at all. This is no big deal. Right. Totally shows, he said, subtly pointing to her slightly trembling hand. Let's just hope you don't, what's the word, fall apart. She took a deep breath, keeping her cool. Don't worry, I'm not dropping anything today. Dylan tried to hide a grin but didn't reply. After all, managing partner Benson walked into the room, closing the door behind him. Good morning, everyone. Shall we begin? The meeting moved forward with introductions, technical discussions, contract clauses, and a lot of numbers flying back and forth. Julia followed everything, taking notes, trying her best to look completely professional. But inside, it was a full-on battle. On one side, focus. On the other, nerves growing by the minute. All right then, Benson said, crossing his arms. We have the final draft of the contract here. We just need to go over the last few points. Mr. Villanova adjusted his glasses, crossed his arms, and replied in that cold and direct tone. I hope there won't be any mistakes this time. My patience has its limits. Dylan, sitting next to him, flashed that confident smile that seemed built in. Don't worry. Everything has been checked down to the smallest detail. Julia adjusted herself in her chair, pulling the folder closer, when she noticed something. Her coffee cup, sitting right on the edge of the table. Better pull it a little closer, before. And before she could even finish the thought, her pen slipped from her hand and fell to the floor. In her reflex to grab it, splash, her elbow hit the cup. The coffee flew. In slow motion, she could see it, part of it going straight onto the table, another part splashing onto the papers. And one perfect, precise, laser-focused stream, landing right on Mr. Villanova's expensive gray suit jacket. Silence. Total. The kind of silence that hurts. The kind that makes your brain scream, run. Julia froze, staring at the coffee slowly spreading across the table, soaking spreadsheets, printed contracts, and of course, the client's jacket. Mr. Villanova slowly lowered his eyes to his own chest. Dylan's eyes widened, and for 2 seconds, he tried, really tried, to hold back a laugh. But he failed. "Oh, wow," he said, bringing his hand to his mouth, trying to hide it. That was almost artistic. Mr. Villanova blinked, stunned, holding his breath like he was deciding whether to scream or call for help. "Oh my gosh, oh no, oh no." Julia jumped up, grabbing napkins, trying to wipe it up. It was an accident, I swear. The cup, it slipped. The pen, The words tumbled, scrambled, and vanished. "Please, don't move, Mr. Ray," Villanova said in a voice colder than the Arctic. "Just don't touch me." Dylan coughed, trying to regain composure, but couldn't resist. "Julia," he crossed his arms, "are you trying to sabotage the firm, or is this just a natural talent?" She slowly turned toward him, narrowing her eyes. "You're not helping." Benson, with his hand on his forehead, took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Julia, maybe, just sit down." She looked at the table, then at the client, then at the soaked papers, and simply wanted to disappear. I'll go get some paper towels." She turned so fast she nearly knocked over her chair on the way out. As she ran from the room, Dylan looked at Benson and muttered, "She really takes that leave your mark thing seriously, doesn't she?" Benson took a deep breath, adjusting his tie. This didn't happen. Mr. Villanova was dabbing at his jacket with a napkin, breathing deeply, looking as if he was seriously reconsidering the entire meeting. Or maybe his entire life. Julia came back with rolls of paper towels, wiping the table, the papers, and what was left of her dignity, whispering to herself, "Congratulations, Julia. You've officially outdone the pants incident." Dylan stood up, grabbed some documents that had stayed dry, straightened them on the table, and switching completely to that serious tone he used when it was time to fix everything, said, "Mr. Villanova, I know this situation was out of the ordinary, to say the least." He crossed his arms, looking him straight in the eye. "But honestly, if I may, I'd rather have a team that spills coffee out of nerves than a team that spills contracts out of incompetence." The businessman stared, saying nothing. Julia, not fully understanding where he was going with this, took a deep breath and added, Well, speaking of competence, I was reviewing this contract and noticed something that, honestly, no one here had caught." Benson and Dylan exchanged surprised looks. She pulled out a dry folder, opened it, and pointed to a clause. "Here, item 7B. In the second half-year profit projection, you calculated the profitability using the average occupancy rate from the past 3 years. She pointed again, took a breath. "But that average doesn't reflect the last 6 months, which showed growth. This means you're underestimating your own projection by," she did some quick math, "about 12.5%. Villanova frowned, grabbed the paper, checked it, then looked at his assistant, who immediately started typing, verifying the numbers. Dylan crossed his arms, holding back a different kind of smile now. Not teasing, pure surprise. The assistant confirmed, She's right." Villanova adjusted his glasses, looking at Julia with a completely different expression, one that no longer had impatience, but interest. "Impressive," he said, straightening his jacket. "How long did it take you to catch that?" She looked at Dylan, then at Benson. Somewhere between one coffee spill and the next." The businessman couldn't help it. He smiled. "Well, if every disaster came with a solution like that, I guess the world would be a much more efficient place." Dylan smiled, shaking his head. "Well, I've always said she's one of a kind." Benson took a deep breath, shaking his head somewhere between relief and disbelief. "Julia, you, really," he couldn't even finish, he just laughed. "I don't know whether to promote you or quarantine you far away from anything with liquid." Villanova stood up, shook hands with Benson, with Dylan, and finally with Julia. If my team had even half the sharp eye you have, we'd be richer than we already are. She chuckled, a bit shy. Well, I also accept commission, just so you know, he laughed. Duly noted. The meeting ended on a light, relaxed note. A total turnaround from the disaster it had started as. As everyone left, Dylan walked over, crossed his arms, and looked straight at her. You know, I'm starting to think you knock things over on purpose, just to seem more human. She raised an eyebrow, holding back a smile. Maybe. It works, doesn't it? He laughed. It does. Very well. And in that exact moment, both of them knew. No matter how much they denied it, argued, or teased each other, something was happening there. Something no contract, no matter how well written, could have ever predicted. If anyone had told Julia that after spilling coffee on the most demanding client in the entire office and still walking out of the meeting to applause, her day would calm down, well, that person would be completely wrong. Because right then, she was racing down the hallways, arms full of contracts, balancing a cup of coffee, yes, she never learns, and a phone buzzing nonstop. Julia, Michael called, stepping out of his office. I need you to take these documents to the 16th floor contract office. It's urgent. 16th. Got it, she replied, adjusting the papers. And be careful with... He didn't even finish. With the elevator? The coffee? Gravity? She cut him off as she pressed the elevator button. Relax. Nothing is going wrong today. The elevator dinged. The doors opened, and of course, guess who was inside? Dylan. Perfect suit, tied perfectly in place, leaning casually against the wall, holding a folder and wearing that smile. That half smile that said, guess who's about to mess with you for the next few minutes? Well, the contract destroyer, he commented, raising an eyebrow. And carrying coffee again? You're brave. She held back a laugh, stepped in, and pressed 16. Yeah, some people say I'm fearless. Others say I'm a walking disaster. I'd say a little bit of both, he replied, crossing his arms. And where are you off to with all that paperwork? Saving the world. Or at least, the contract department, she smiled, adjusting the papers. You? Escaped my own meeting, he sighed. 2 hours of a client arguing about PowerPoint fonts. Her eyes widened as she held back a laugh. Wow, that should definitely be classified as psychological torture. The elevator started to move smoothly. A few seconds of silence followed, but it was that kind of silence, the weird one, full of things unsaid, until a flicker in the lights, a loud click, and the elevator stopped. The light switched to emergency mode, dimmer now, and the cabin stood absolutely still between floors. Julia's eyes went wide. She looked at the panel. Nothing. Blinking. Blank. No. She started pressing buttons. Come on, up, down, anything. Dylan picked up the intercom. Control? Static. More static. Then a muffled voice finally replied, We've had an electrical failure. A few elevators stopped. Maintenance is on the way. Dylan sighed, crossing his arms. Oh, perfect. We're stuck. Julia took a deep breath, leaning against the wall. Okay. Stay calm. This'll be quick. Of course, he replied, straightening his tie. 10, maybe 15 minutes. Max. Silence. Unless, he added, glancing at the ceiling, it's like that time last year. They were stuck for 2 hours. 2 hours. Julia almost spilled her coffee. You're joking. Hopefully, he answered with a crooked smile. But I don't think I am. She breathed in deeply, trying not to panic. All right, it's fine. We're fine. She set the papers on the floor, straightened her hair. It's just an elevator. Stopped with you in it. She glanced at him, pretending to panic. Worst combo possible. Hey! Dylan put his hand on his chest, pretending to be offended. I am excellent company. She crossed her arms, looking him straight in the eye. That is debatable. The two stared at each other for a few seconds. The corner of their mouths started curling into smiles, slowly, like this teasing had become their favorite game. Dylan took a deep breath, leaning against the side rail of the elevator. You know, it's funny. What is? She asked, adjusting the papers on the floor. That you're the only person in this office who doesn't back down from me, he said, looking directly at her. That is rare. Very rare. She blinked, caught somewhere between surprised and disarmed. And you're the only person who can make me nervous and, at the same time, make me laugh. He smiled. See? Told you. Great company. They both laughed, and for a few seconds the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't just teasing anymore. It wasn't just humor. It was something more. Dylan looked up at the ceiling, crossed his arms, and took a deep breath. You know, I'm not really like this. Like, what? She asked, frowning. This guy, you know, he said, staring off. Always putting on a show, always building walls. She adjusted herself and sat down on the elevator floor, crossing her legs. And, why are you like that? He took a deep breath. My father, he said plainly. I grew up hearing that being the best was the only option, that showing weakness meant losing. Julia stayed quiet, watching, really listening. So, I became that guy, he went on, looking down at his hand. The guy who doesn't mess up, who doesn't allow himself to mess up, who can't, he made air quotes, fail. She shook her head, resting her chin in her hand. Dylan, you know that's not really living, right? He let out a short, bitter laugh. Lately, I'm starting to see that. Silence filled the space again, but this time it wasn't uncomfortable. It felt intimate. Julia smiled, looking at him. You know, behind that suit, that tie, that arrogant lawyer face, there's actually a pretty interesting human being. He raised an eyebrow, smiling. Interesting, huh? Yeah, she replied, biting her lower lip, trying not to smile. Annoyingly interesting. Dylan moved a little closer, kneeling down so he was at her level. And you, intern, you're more than I expected. Their eyes met, and in that exact moment, there was no stuck elevator, no office, no contracts, just them. He leaned in slowly. She didn't move. Not forward, not back, just stayed there, breathing, watching. The space between them grew smaller. The silence turned electric, almost. And then, the elevator jerked, the lights flickered on, the panel lit up, the doors opened. They jumped, adjusting themselves like nothing had happened. Oh, yeah, it's working again, Dylan said, fixing his tie, trying to look casual. Yeah, working, Julia replied, quickly gathering the papers, her face completely red. The security guard at the door looked at them, puzzled. Everything okay in there? All good. They both answered at the same time, practically stepping on each other's words. They walked out together, side by side, without making eye contact, as if what almost happened hadn't happened at all. But they both knew. They knew that from that moment on, nothing would be quite the same. In the days that followed, something different started happening. And it wasn't just in her head. No, definitely not. Michael, always the keen observer, was the first to notice. All right, explain something to me, he said, arms crossed, leaning in the doorway. Since when does Mr. Most Feared Lawyer in the office help interns change printer toner? Julia was holding a folder, trying not to laugh as she watched one of the strangest sights she'd seen in a while. Dylan, crouched down, completely lost, staring at the printer like it was some kind of unsolvable riddle. I'm not helping, Dylan replied, unsure how to fit a piece he was holding. I'm just passing through. Michael raised an eyebrow. Passing through? Right at the moment the printer broke down? Coincidence, Dylan said, fixing his tie, even though his shirt sleeves were rolled up and he had black toner ink on his finger. Julia crossed her arms, amused. And, since when do you know how to change toner? Dylan held up the piece, looked at her, then at the printer, and said, Since, now. Michael tried not to laugh. Right, and I'm an astronaut in my spare time. Dylan sighed, standing up and brushing off his hands, spreading even more ink on his suit jacket. Okay, fine. Printers aren't exactly my thing. Julia hugged the folder to her chest, biting her lower lip to hold back a laugh. And what exactly were you trying to do? He crossed his arms and looked away. Just seeing if you needed anything. Michael grabbed the doorframe, pretending to think. Right. And this whole seeing if she needs anything thing happens 3 times an hour? Coincidences, Dylan replied, adjusting his tie for the 3rd time in 2 minutes. The world's full of them. Michael pretended to take notes on his phone. I'm starting a spreadsheet called Dylan's Coincidences. Julia, trying to stay composed, took a deep breath. Guys, seriously, the two of you are something else. This is starting to feel like a comedy scene. Dylan adjusted his blazer, cleared his throat, and pointing at the printer, added, And, just for the record, this printer clearly has something personal against me. Michael laughed. Or maybe, it just doesn't want to be an accomplice to your plan. What plan? Dylan shot back, raising an eyebrow. Michael shrugged, smiling. You know, that little plan of yours to keep circling around here, like Julia's personal satellite. Julia's eyes went wide. "Excuse me?" She looked from Michael to Dylan and back again, completely surprised. Not sure if she should laugh, run, or pretend she hadn't heard a thing. Dylan crossed his arms, straightened his posture, and answered with the most shameless look. "That's pure imagination on your part, Michael." Michael crossed his arms too. "Of course. Just my imagination. You never show up out of nowhere. Never suddenly appear in the file room for no reason. Never, ever come all the way over here just to ask." He made air quotes. "Do you need anything?" "I'm helpful," Dylan replied with a grin. "Unlike some people who like making up crazy theories." Julia shook her head, trying not to laugh. "Okay, this is getting way too entertaining." Meanwhile, the printer was still broken. Dylan looked at it as if the machine were responsible for all this awkwardness. "All right, well then, Mr. Printer, you're officially fired." Michael had to lean on the wall to keep from laughing. "Oh boy, are you going to sue the printer now?" Dylan sighed. "No, but I'm considering it." Julia took a deep breath, crouched down, opened the printer's side panel, and with 2 quick moves, removed the old cartridge, popped in a new one, pressed 2 buttons, and the printer started working again. "All done," she said, standing up and wiping her hands. "Just unlock this part here, and there you go." Dylan stood there for a few seconds in silence, staring at the machine. That's it?" "That's it," Julia answered, smiling. Mysteriously, no PhD in mechanical engineering required. Michael pretended to applaud. Round of applause for Julia, and even bigger applause for Dylan for his effort. "Thank you very much," Dylan replied, crossing his arms and pretending to be offended. "I'm feeling extremely appreciated." Julia gathered the papers as the printer finally started spitting them out. "Well, now that the Save the Printer mission is complete, I guess I can get back to work, right?" Dylan adjusted his suit jacket, discreetly wiping the last bit of ink from his hand. "Of course, I was just stopping by to..." He paused, looking at her to see if everything was okay. Michael laughed, shaking his head. "Yeah, Dylan, that's pretty obvious. Really obvious." "Obvious to who?" Dylan shot back, raising an eyebrow. Michael pointed. "To me, to Julia, to the intern who just ran past the door, and probably to the printer too." Julia tried not to laugh. "Guys, seriously? You two are a whole show on your own." Dylan took a deep breath, crossed his arms, and, looking away, said, "I'm not jealous, okay?" Silence. Michael raised an eyebrow, smiling. "No one said anything about jealousy, Dylan." Julia's eyes widened as she held back her laughter. "Yeah, nobody said anything." Dylan realized too late what he'd just said. He ran a hand over his face, shaking his head. "Great. Perfect. This didn't happen." Michael crossed his arms, laughing. "Oh, it happened, and I'm mentally recording it. Forever." Dylan straightened his tie, trying to recover his composure. "Well then, it's been a pleasure, folks." He pointed toward the door. "I have very important things to do. Extremely important things." Michael blinked. "Like checking if Julia needs anything else?" Dylan opened the door, giving Julia a sideways glance. "Maybe," and he left. Julia stood there, staring at the open door, trying not to laugh, and said, "Guys, seriously, he's not even trying to hide it anymore, is he?" Michael took a deep breath, shaking his head, smiling. "No, Julia, he's not. And honestly, this is getting more interesting by the minute." And it really was. Very much so. The sound of Julia's heels echoed through the hallway, mixed with the excited buzz of the staff. Since early that morning, the office felt different. People were whispering in corners, glances exchanged, and wherever she walked, knowing smiles appeared like everyone was in on something. Except her. She quickened her pace, holding a stack of documents, eyeing each person she passed with suspicion. "Okay, what's going on?" she whispered, adjusting her blazer. "It's like there's a spoiler for my own life, and no one bothered to tell me." And she wasn't wrong. In the main conference room, senior partner Benson was organizing papers, looking at the partners, attorneys, and interns as they began filling the seats. At the center, a huge screen displayed the quarterly performance report, with charts, numbers, and one very curious highlight. Employee of the month, Julia Mendez. Intern, Dylan, sitting at the end of the table, crossed his arms, trying to hide that half smile that kept showing up every time her name came up. Michael, sitting next to him, adjusted his tie, looking curiously at the slide. "This is not common," he commented, frowning. "Not at all," Dylan replied, straightening his shirt sleeve. "But I think it's more than well-deserved. Well, look who's turned into a fan, Michael shot back, barely holding back a smile. Dylan pretended not to hear, but the smirk at the corner of his mouth said it all. Benson cleared his throat and stood up. Good morning, everyone. Let's get started. He pointed at the screen. As you all know, this last quarter was extremely challenging, but thanks to everyone's dedication, we achieved truly impressive results. The room filled with applause. Benson continued. And of course, a few names stood out during this time. He paused dramatically, glancing directly at Julia, who sat in the back with wide eyes, clearly having no idea what was going on. And to the surprise of some, or maybe not, our top highlight is someone who, despite being an intern, showed a level of commitment, skill, and boldness that left us all impressed. Julia's eyes got even wider. No, she whispered to herself, sinking into her chair. This is not happening. Benson smiled. Julia Mendez, please, stand up. The entire office turned toward her. Applause broke out. Some clapped politely, others cheered like they were at a concert. Michael clapped, smiling. You nailed it. Dylan clapped like anyone else, but the way he was looking at her, it wasn't just a simple congratulations. It was a mix of pride, admiration, and that classic expression of someone thinking, yep, now I'm in trouble. Julia stood up, completely embarrassed, her cheeks burning. Oh, no, guys, really? You don't have to. Benson continued. Julia not only saved contracts but spotted mistakes, led analyses that even senior attorneys missed, and he glanced straight at Dylan, was a key player in more than 3 crucial cases. Dylan looked up at the ceiling for a couple of seconds, took a deep breath, as if thinking, yep, go ahead, rub it in. Benson finished. And for that, I just want to say we are extremely pleased with your work. And yes, we hope to see you here for a very, very long time. Another round of applause. Julia gave a shy little wave, bit her lower lip, pushed her hair behind her ear, and sat down, shrinking in her chair. I'm going to disappear. I need to dig a hole and disappear. When the meeting ended, the office turned into something of a social event. Everyone wanted to talk to Julia, congratulate her, joke around, or throw out comments like, wow, someone's famous now. Careful, you'll be a partner soon. Time to negotiate that salary. But what she didn't know was that the boldest comment was still on its way. In the middle of all the buzz, Dylan appeared. Perfect blazer, that signature half-smile, hands in his pockets. He stopped in front of her, looked her straight in the eye, and said, All right, I think it's time to make this official. She frowned. Make what official? He took a deep breath, crossed his arms. Work with me. Directly. Leave Michael's team and join mine. Silence. Total silence. If there had been chatter, whispers, and little laughs before, now every single eye was on them, watching. Michael, who was walking over with a coffee in hand, stopped, blinked, looked at the scene, looked at his coffee, then back at the scene and muttered, mostly to himself, I knew it. I knew it. Julia blinked several times, trying to figure out if this was real. Wait, are you serious? Dylan nodded, standing his ground. Serious. Completely serious. He glanced around, noticing all the eyes on them, and added with a little shrug, Well, since everyone's already listening, yeah, I'm officially making you an offer. Michael crossed his arms, smiling. Oh, so that's how it is now? Stealing talent? Right in broad daylight? Dylan grinned. I prefer to call it strategically reallocating talent. Julia clutched her folder to her chest, looking back and forth between the two of them. You guys, this is surreal. Michael stepped closer, standing by her side. Careful, Julia. Don't fall for it. Dylan just wants you close to steal your talent, or maybe your heart. The entire office erupted with murmurs, giggles, shoulder taps, and that collective ooh. Dylan took a deep breath, adjusted his tie, and replied, Michael, please. Then he looked straight at Julia. Don't listen to him. My offer is serious. I want you on my team. Full salary, bonuses, and your very own coffee capsule drawer. She tried not to laugh, crossing her arms. Wow, this escalated quickly. Michael chimed in, smiling. And if you stay on my team, we'll double the coffee capsules. Plus, I'll throw in an ergonomic chair. Dylan blinked. I have an ergonomic chair too. Mine has a massage feature, Michael shot back, trying not to laugh. The whole office burst out laughing. People pretended to work, but really, everyone was watching what looked like a live sitcom unfolding. Julia took a deep breath, crossed her arms, and looked from one to the other. Wow. So, it's official. This has turned into an open competition. Dylan slipped his hands into his pockets, smiling. And just for the record, I play to win. Michael reached out a hand. We'll see, Carter. We'll see. She shook her head, holding back a smile. Okay. Let me think, because honestly, this feels more like an auction than a job offer. Dylan smiled, arms crossed. Take your time, and just for the record, no one on my team gets stuck in elevators anymore. Michael couldn't help himself, and on my team, the printer never jams. Not anymore. The whole office laughed again. Julia laughed too, shaking her head. You two are impossible. But deep down, way down, she knew. This wasn't just about work anymore. It wasn't just about contracts, coffee, or broken printers. It was about something much bigger. After what became the most talked about scene of the month, also known as the Intern auction, the whole office seemed more interested in following this corporate rom-com than actually working. But if anyone seemed truly out of sorts, it was Dylan. Since that public showdown with Michael, he hadn't quite known how to act. And apparently, his brain didn't either. Because in the past few hours, he had done things he never, ever imagined doing. Like, for instance, getting 2 coffees instead of 1, and bringing one straight to Julia's desk. Here, he said, placing the cup on her desk, trying to sound casual. Thought, maybe, you'd want one. Julia looked up, raising an eyebrow. You brought me coffee? He adjusted his tie, trying to play it cool. No, I mean, not exactly. I stopped by the cafe, and, well, they gave me 2 by mistake. He scratched the back of his neck, clearly uncomfortable. So there was 1 left over. She tried not to laugh. I see. And by any chance, did they also write my name on it? She held up the cup, which read Julia. Dylan turned red all the way to his ears. Coincidences happen. She smiled, shaking her head. You're getting pretty good at this, you know. He crossed his arms, looking away. At what? At pretending you're not clearly trying to get my attention. He opened his mouth, then closed it, crossed his arms again, took a deep breath and said, I'm not. I mean, okay, maybe a little. Julia held back a laugh, resting her chin on her hand, looking straight at him. You're completely lost, aren't you? He sighed, shaking his head. And you love it, don't you? She smiled. A lot. Dylan ran a hand over his face, clearly torn between walking away or staying, and to his own surprise, he stayed. Okay, look. He pulled up a chair and sat down next to her. I'm not good at this, okay? At what? Talking, she teased. He made air quotes. Talking to you, she smiled, sorting the papers on her desk. And why is it different with me? He took a breath. Because, he looked at her, then looked away. Because you throw me completely off balance. Silence. For a few seconds, Julia blinked, surprised, like her brain was checking if she'd really heard that. Wow, she said finally, resting her chin on her hand. That was almost a confession. Dylan rubbed his face. It wasn't, I mean, not exactly. She tried not to laugh. Right, not exactly. Got it. He took a deep breath and crossed his arms. Okay. Look, you throw me off. I don't know how to act. I don't know what to say. He looked at her, squinting a little. You know what you're doing to me, don't you? She gave a mischievous smile. I'm starting to figure it out. Dylan shook his head, chuckling, even though he tried not to. This is totally insane. I'm one of the most respected lawyers in this office. I've negotiated million-dollar contracts, faced judges, prosecutors, and now, he pointed at her, I can't even finish a sentence when you look at me like that. She raised an eyebrow, resting her chin on her hand. Like? How? He took a breath and looked right at her. Like you know that. He bit his lower lip, then exhaled. That you're the one in control here. She smiled, crossing her arms. And am I not? Dylan broke into a wide grin, shaking his head. You are. Completely. For a few seconds, they just looked at each other. No jokes, no sarcasm, nothing but that look that said, so, now what? He took a deep breath, stood up, adjusted his tie and blurted out, almost without thinking. I like you, okay? Silence. Total silence. He froze. She froze. The planet, quite possibly, froze too. Wait, what? She asked, eyes wide. Say that again. He ran a hand over his face, squeezing his eyes shut. No, that wasn't supposed to come out like that. He took another deep breath, pointed at her. You make me, completely. He waved his hand, searching for the right word, off balance. She clutched the folder to her chest, holding back both a laugh and her pounding heart. Wow, was that a confession or a system failure? He laughed, rubbing the back of his neck, completely unsure where to hide his face. Maybe, a little of both. She took a deep breath, smiling. So you like me, is that it? Dylan put his hands in his pockets, shook his head, smiling. Yeah, that's it, intern. I like you. The silence that followed was comfortable. Beautiful, full of meaning that no words could really capture. Julia crossed her arms, looking at him with that smile only she could pull off. Well, it was about time, wasn't it? He raised an eyebrow. Time? She stood up, grabbed the coffee he had brought her, took a sip, and answered with a smile. Because I liked you too, Dylan. He blinked, completely caught off guard. Okay, now I'm the one, speechless. She laughed, adjusting her bag strap. Well, welcome to my world. Dylan smiled, shaking his head, crossing his arms. This is really happening, right? She took 2 steps toward him, stood on tiptoe, and very close, looked straight into his eyes. It is, counselor? And honestly? He asked, almost breathless. She smiled. You're completely irresistible when you're flustered. He laughed, shaking his head. You are impossible. She winked, amused. And you just fell for it. And as they walked out of the room, side by side, laughing, teasing each other, one thing became very clear to both of them. There, in the middle of lawsuits, contracts, and printers that kept breaking, something much bigger had begun. And this time, even their hearts couldn't argue against it. If someone had told Julia, on the day she first walked into that office, that she would one day be side by side with Dylan Carter, not just as a future lawyer, but as a partner, she probably would have laughed. Loudly. Very loudly. But there she was, ID badge swinging, folders in hand, heels clicking hurriedly down the hallway with Dylan beside her, both talking nonstop about deadlines, clauses, hearings, and in the middle of it all, stealing glances and smiles that neither of them could hide anymore. Okay, Dylan said, adjusting his tie, looking at her. So, just to be clear, you officially agreed to work with me. She tried not to laugh. Yes. Official, he confirmed, crossing his arms and walking backward in front of her. No more I'm thinking about it, maybe, or we'll see. Yes, Carter, she answered, amused. I am officially your assistant. He flashed a wide smile, looking almost proud. And you're not regretting it? She pretended to think. Not yet, but the day's just getting started. He laughed, shaking his head. You're impossible. Julia winked, gathering her folders, and you just fell for it. But before they could keep up their flirty banter, disguised as jokes, Benson appeared at the door, holding a red folder. You two, conference room. Now. They exchanged glances, raised their eyebrows, and followed. Inside the room, Benson placed the folder on the table and said, with no small talk, We have a case. Big one. And urgent. Dylan crossed his arms, focused. Let's hear it. The Hernandez Real Estate Group, Benson answered. They're suing our client for breach of contract, and they're asking for a ridiculous amount in damages. Julia pulled out a chair, opening the folder. Wow, this is pretty serious. Benson nodded. And you two are taking it. Dylan raised an eyebrow, looking at his boss. The two of us? Yes, he confirmed. The client requested you, but they also asked for Julia. Silence. Dylan looked at her. She looked at him, and for a second both almost forgot they were in a serious meeting. Well, Dylan adjusted his tie. Let's go win this. Benson smiled. That's what I wanted to hear. The courthouse steps were crowded. Lawyers, clients, reporters, everyone moving in every direction. Dylan and Julia climbed the stairs side by side with steady steps. He adjusted his tie for what felt like the 100th time. She held the folder so tightly it looked like it was her shield against the nerves. Nervous? He asked, glancing sideways. Me? She took a deep breath. Just a little. Dylan tried not to laugh. Well, if it makes you feel better, I am too. Her eyes went wide. Really? He smiled. Seriously. But don't tell anyone, I've got a reputation to protect. They walked into the courtroom. The judge was already seated, and the opposing attorneys were organizing their documents. Let's go, Dylan said, opening his folder. Total focus. But of course, nothing is ever that simple. As he stood up to hand a document to the judge, Dylan tripped on his own shoelace. The world shifted into slow motion. He stumbled, reached forward, bumped into a chair, hit the file cart, and missed knocking over the judge by just 2 inches. For heaven's sake, the judge grabbed the bench, eyes wide. "Are you all right, Mr. Carter?" Dylan, red all the way to his hairline, straightened his jacket, took a deep breath, and answered with as much dignity as he could gather. "Perfectly fine, Your Honor. Just testing the durability of the furniture." Julia, sitting at the assistant table, nearly choked trying to hold back a laugh. The opposing attorney whispered something to his assistant, both struggling not to laugh, while the judge shook his head, adjusted his glasses, and said, "Very well, let's proceed." Carefully, Dylan took a deep breath, adjusted his folder, glanced at Julia, who was biting back a full-blown laugh, and muttered, "Not one word." She bit her lower lip, nodding, "Not a word." And even with stumbles and near disasters, the two were flawless. Sharp arguments, solid defense, quick thinking, and a teamwork that felt like it had been built over years. When Julia stood to present a clause analysis, even the judge adjusted his glasses, clearly impressed. When Dylan countered an opposing argument with such quick reasoning that two of the other attorneys exchanged uneasy looks, the victory felt closer and closer. After 3 hours of debate, questioning, and rebuttals, the judge brought down the gavel. "This court rules in favor of the defense. Case closed." The client jumped up, practically bursting with excitement. Dylan and Julia exchanged a look and a subtle fist bump, small but full of meaning. "We did it," she said, smiling. "We did," he nodded, giving her a wink. And, not to brag, but it was beautiful. They walked out of the courtroom side by side, but as soon as they reached the hallway, Dylan stopped. "Julia," he said, holding her by the arm. She turned, looking him right in the eyes. "What?" He took a deep breath. "I'm not going to wait anymore." "Wait for what?" she asked. But before she could finish the sentence, he pulled her in by the waist. "This," he simply said. And the kiss happened, right there in the courthouse hallway, surrounded by passing attorneys, clients, security guards, and of course a few co-workers from the office who just happened to be there, clearly hiding behind the column. "I knew it," whispered Michael, holding his phone, probably recording everything. "I knew it." "Finally," said one of the assistants, holding her hand over her heart like she was watching a romantic movie. The kiss was the kind that makes the whole world disappear. Just them. Just that moment. Just that feeling. Bottled up for so long it exploded in every second. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless, smiling, with their cheeks burning. "Wow," she whispered, biting her lower lip. "That was—" "Yeah," he smiled. "It was." From behind the column, Michael added, "Okay, someone hand me a tissue. This is cuter than my favorite movie." The whole office burst into applause, laughter, and cheering. Some even started clapping right there in the courthouse. Dylan, with that mix of smugness and pure charm, looked at Julia and softly said, "This, officially, was the best case win of my life." She squeezed his hand, smiling. "And I can guarantee this is one contract I have no plans of canceling." And deep down, they both knew. This wasn't just a match in the courtroom. It was a match in the heart. After the most talked-about kiss in the office's history, and probably in the courthouse's too, Julia and Dylan's life didn't exactly go back to what anyone would call normal. Then again, normal was never really their thing. Officially, they were together. Unofficially, it felt like the whole office was more invested in their relationship than in their actual caseload. The next morning, when Julia arrived, she found a sheet of paper taped to the break room door. "Attention, it is now officially forbidden to root against this couple, management, or maybe just the office gossip team." She laughed, shaking her head as she walked into the building. And of course, there he was, Dylan Carter, perfect suit, leaning casually against the break room counter holding 2 coffees. "Morning, intern," he said, smiling. She crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "Morning, attorney, and at this point I think you need a new nickname for me." He pretended to think. He looked at her from head to toe and smiled. "Maybe future Mrs. Carter?" She raised her eyebrows, trying not to laugh. "Easy there, counselor. Don't you think you're getting a little ahead of yourself?" He handed her the coffee with a shrug. "Hey, you never know." Just then, Michael walked by in the hallway holding a folder, giving them that classic look of someone who never misses a chance to comment. "Good luck, Julia."